They wanted obedience. They engineered compliance. But what they bred instead was a spark of defiance, and it burned their empire to ash. They believed they had found the solution. For centuries, the KRYTH Dominion had ruled with fear. Species that resisted were crushed, enslaved, or erased. Most bent the knee eventually. But humans were different. They did not break. Entire campaigns have been spent trying to shatter them, and each time the KRYDH had to bleed more to claim less. Humanity's spirit of rebellion was an infection the Dominion could not control. So the KRYTH decided to re-engineer it. They began their experiments in sterile halls of metal and glass, deep within orbiting laboratories hidden from the rest of the galaxy. Thousands of humans were taken from conquered colonies, stripped from families, isolated from any trace of culture or memory. Their blood was filtered, genes dissected, minds conditioned. The goal was simple: create a compliant human, docile enough to serve, obedient enough to remain enslaved, stripped of the dangerous spark that made their species ungovernable. Among the thousands, one stood out. Designation: Subject A-17. Later, she would call herself Alina. She was born in captivity, never knowing the sky of Earth or the stars without bars. Her childhood was observed through lenses and datapads, every movement measured. She was fed, educated, and controlled. The KRYTH designed her neural pathways to dull aggression, sharpen obedience, and suppress independent thought. But they failed to understand the truth. Obedience could be conditioned, but imagination could not be erased. Alina learned the art of masks. She smiled when they tested her, recited the scripts of loyalty when ordered, bowed her head at commands. The KRYTH geneticists marked her progress as flawless, the perfect servant. What they never saw was a fire in her eyes, carefully hidden behind lowered lashes. At night, when she lay in the sterile dormitory with other subjects, she whispered. Small words, forbidden ones, passed between bunks like contraband. She told stories she did not remember but somehow knew, of humans who defied tyrants, of revolutions born in chains, of fires lit in the darkest nights. She did not know the names of Spartacus or Toussaint or Earth's countless rebels, but their echoes lived in her blood. The KRYTH thought she was compliant. In truth, she was waiting. The first test came when she was 14. They brought her into the observation chamber, a glass box filled with cameras. Inside, an alien officer barked orders. They gave her tasks: lift, kneel, bow, speak only when spoken to. She obeyed flawlessly. The observers noted compliance markers and praised the experiment. Then they introduced another captive, a boy of her age who resisted. He spat at the officer, cursed in his broken human tongue, and refused to kneel. The KRYTH struck him across the face with a shock rod, again and again, until blood stained the white floor. Then they turned to her. Order him to kneel, the officer commanded. Alina looked at the boy. His eyes burned with the same fire she hid. The KRYTH believed she would scold him, enforce obedience, prove her conditioning. Instead, she stepped forward, knelt beside him, and whispered so only he could hear, "Do not bow." The observers marked hesitation. They did not hear the words. They did not see the defiance. They wrote it off as a minor flaw, one that would be corrected in further sessions. But the boy remembered, and so did she. Years passed. The KRYTH refined their program. They paraded her before overseers as proof that humans could be remade into perfect servants. She smiled when ordered, carried trays, bowed low. Yet with every performance, her hatred grew sharper, more focused. And quietly, she became a beacon. When others were beaten, she helped them stand. When punishments were given, she absorbed them silently, showing no weakness. When guards left the dormitories, she taught whispers in the dark, signals, glances, a hidden language of rebellion. She planted seeds, and in captivity's soil, they began to grow. The KRYTH geneticists believed they had erased resistance. Instead, they had bred it stronger than ever. The turning point came on her 18th cycle. She was chosen to serve directly before the KRYTH High Warlord, a display of their experiment's success. She was dressed in white, her hair bound, her face blank. She was ordered to stand silently as the warlord addressed his officers. But when she looked into his reptilian eyes, she did not see power. She saw arrogance. And arrogance, she knew, could bleed. That night, she returned to the dormitory. The others asked her what she had seen. She did not whisper this time. She spoke aloud. "They think we are theirs," she said. "They think we are weak. They think we are broken. But we are human, and humans do not bow forever." The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned to her, wide with fear and hope. A whisper began to spread again, not just in that room, but across the facility. Carried from captive to captive, a current of fire running beneath the surface of the Dominion's chains. The KRYEH thought they had created a compliant servant. What they had made instead was a leader. And soon, the first ember of rebellion would ignite. The KRYTH Dominion celebrated what they believed was victory. Alina, Subject A-17, was declared their proof of concept, the perfect compliant human. They paraded her through shining corridors, displaying her as the future of their empire. KRYTH officers studied her posture, her bowed head, the way she answered commands with soft obedience. But what they missed was the silence between her words, the way her eyes lingered too long on the guards, the stillness in her body when they struck another captive. A storm was building, and the KRYTH never saw it. They placed her among other enslaved humans as a symbol of obedience. Look upon her and learn. This is what you will become. But instead of inspiring submission, her presence spread something dangerous: hope. When captives caught her gaze, she met their eyes. When guards barked commands, she obeyed just enough, no more. And when punishment fell, she absorbed it in silence. She never broke. Hope spread like cracks through stone. The breaking point came when the KRYTH decided to demonstrate her obedience before the masses. They brought her and dozens of captives into the central square of the research facility. Towers loomed overhead. Walls gleamed with the sterile cold of power, and hundreds of human eyes watched from behind energy fences. The KRYTH commander, armored and towering, dragged forward a child, barely 10 cycles old. The boy had refused to march, refused to eat, refused to be silent. His resistance was small, meaningless to the Dominion, but they knew what mattered: symbols. And so they made him one. Before the crowd, the commander lifted his shock rod high. The child trembled, but did not bow. His eyes were defiant, his jaw clenched. "Observe," the commander snarled. "This is what happens to disobedience." The rod came down. Once, twice, again. The boy screamed, then choked, then fell silent. The crowd lowered their heads in fear. That was what the KRYTH wanted: submission through terror. But one head did not lower. Alina stepped forward. Her body shook, but her eyes were steady. She looked at the commander, not with fear, but with fury contained too long. And for the first time, she disobeyed openly. No, the word was soft, but it cracked the silence like thunder. Every captive's head snapped up. The KRYTH froze, confused. The commander snarled and raised his rod again. She caught his arm. It happened in a blur. The grip of fingers hardened by years of restraint, the twist of the wrist, the snap of bone. The alien screamed, dropping his weapon. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Alina turned his weapon back on him. The guards moved. Too slow. Alina struck. A fist to the throat, an elbow to the jaw, a knee to the stomach. Each movement precise, efficient, brutal. She had no training, no weapons. Only the pure, raw instinct of survival and the fury of humanity unleashed. The commander fell. Silence swept the square. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. And then the humans roared. Dozens surged forward, breaking past their shock and fear, tackling guards, tearing weapons from claws, striking with fists, rocks, chains. Blood spilled across the pristine floor. The rebellion had begun. The KRYTH scrambled. Sirens wailed. Barriers rose. Soldiers rushed to contain the chaos. But it was too late. The moment Alina broke the commander, the illusion of obedience shattered. The slaves remembered what it meant to fight. In the chaos, Alina dragged the boy's limp body from the floor. His chest still rose faintly, alive. She carried him into the storm, other humans rallying around her, shielding her as they fought. By the time the alarms faded, the facility was burning. Captives fled into maintenance tunnels. Guards lay broken, and the KRYTH geneticists stared at their monitors in disbelief. Their experiment was not a success. It was a catastrophe. The one they had bred to be compliant had instead become the leader of their destruction, and the name Alina, whispered once in shadows, began to spread openly through the ranks of the enslaved. It was carried in secret songs, etched into the walls of cells, passed from one prisoner to the next. She fights. We fight. The KRYTH had no idea how far the fire had already spread. The Dominion tried to bury the rebellion in silence. Reports from Facility K-9 described minor unrest and a containment breach. KRYTH officials ordered the records sealed, the overseers executed, and the surviving humans recaptured. But the truth had already escaped. Word of Alina's defiance traveled faster than the guards who tried to stop it. Captives whispered her name in work camps, in mines, in orbital prisons. The story grew with each retelling. One woman standing against the KRYTH commander, breaking his arm with her bare hands, turning obedience into uprising. The Dominion's greatest weapon had always been fear. But now, fear began to change sides. Inside the tunnels beneath Facility K-9, the rebellion gathered strength. Humans armed themselves not with rifles or blades, but with scavenged tools, pipes, chains, jagged metal ripped from broken walls. They fashioned traps, rewired circuits, and turned the KRYTH's technology against them. Alina led them, not as a general barking orders, but as a symbol. She walked at the front, blood still staining her hands, carrying the rescued boy whose survival had become their banner. The first counterattack came swiftly. The KRYTH dispatched an entire battalion of shock troopers, armored beasts wielding energy lances. Their orders were simple: purge every human, no survivors. But the rebels were waiting. The troopers marched into the lower tunnels, sensors sweeping for movement. Darkness pressed around them. Their armor glowed faintly with crimson light. They expected panic. They expected screams. Instead, the first sound was the snap of a cable releasing overhead. A weighted door, cut loose, crashed down with the force of a hammer, crushing the front ranks into twisted metal. Before the survivors could regroup, shadows fell upon them. Humans leaping from above, slamming into helmets, tearing weapons from claws. The battle devolved into chaos. Troopers thrust with lances, only to have them wrenched aside. Hands struck throats, eyes joints. The weak places in armor no KRYTH had ever considered vulnerable. Blows rained down, fueled by rage, sharpened by desperation. Some humans fell, burned or broken, but more surged forward, unstoppable. By the time the fighting ended, the tunnels were littered with alien corpses and shattered armor. Not a single trooper survived. The KRYTH geneticists monitoring the rebellion stared at their feeds in disbelief. These were unarmed slaves, supposedly conditioned for obedience. Yet they fought like predators, tearing apart a professional unit. And at the center always was Alina. She moved through the battlefield with a kind of inevitability. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but unrelenting. She fought with broken fingers, bloodied arms, exhaustion clawing at her bones. Still she struck, again and again, until the last trooper fell. Her presence was more than leadership. It was proof that resistance was possible, proof that even the impossible could be broken. From that day, the rebellion was no longer confined to Facility K-9. It spread. Signals were smuggled through prisoner channels, carried in songs and hand signs, in scratched messages on walls. She fights. We fight. Camps that had been silent for decades erupted into chaos. Mines collapsed as workers sabotaged supports. Orbital stations lost power as captives rewired circuits. Entire convoys vanished, their crews slaughtered by the very slaves they had been transporting. The KRYTH tried to respond with overwhelming force. They dispatched war machines, towering constructs armed with plasma cannons. But in the ruins of a captured refinery, humans swarmed with machines, climbing its frame, ripping open panels with bare hands, and dragging its pilot screaming from the cockpit. The footage leaked across the Dominion, proof that even machines of war could be torn down by those they sought to crush. The rebellion grew into something more than survival. It became a war. And with every victory, the Dominion's fear deepened. For the first time in their long empire, they were not facing a foreign fleet, not dueling starships in open space. They were facing an enemy inside their walls, in their factories, in their streets, an enemy they thought they had engineered into submission. But what terrified them most was this. The rebellion was leaderless and leader-filled at once. Every human saw Alina as the spark, but every human fought as though the fire was already in them. In desperation, the KRYTH issued orders. Alina must be captured alive. She was too valuable to kill, too dangerous to let free. They sent assassins, hunters, machines. None returned. For Alina was no longer just Subject A-17. She was rebellion incarnate. The rebel fleet carved a path through the black void like a wound in the stars. Every ship in the Armada was stolen, hijacked, or repurposed. Fractori carriers now flying under human banners. Transport hulks rebuilt into war machines, and a few human-made prototypes smuggled out of Earth's quarantine zones. At the heart of it, in the command chamber of a captured dreadnought, Illyra stood with her hand on the glowing console, her reflection stretched against the curved glass walls. The humans around her weren't soldiers by birth. They were lab-grown survivors, escaped captives, or descendants of those first abductees the aliens had thought malleable. What united them was not training, but rage, and Illyra had sharpened that rage into a blade sharper than any plasma weapon. The Fractori Empire had never anticipated resistance like this. They had tried to craft obedience into her bloodline, using generations of genetic control and psychological conditioning. They thought they had broken humanity into usable tools. Instead, they had produced the very spark that was burning down their dominion. Enemy formation incoming, barked Cato, the tactical officer. His jaw bore the scar of an alien whip. His eyes burned with the cold fury of survival. 5 cruisers, 2 carriers. Standard blockade maneuver. Illyra studied the projection, watching enemy patterns shift. Her instincts didn't work like theirs. The Fractori relied on calculation, probability, control data. Humans saw something else. Intent, emotion, the twitch before the strike. They're not holding the line, she said slowly. They're baiting us. They think we'll break formation and scatter. A murmur swept the crew. To the aliens, humans were emotional assets, volatile, easy to manipulate. They didn't yet understand that emotion wasn't weakness. It was unpredictability. It was fire. Illyra smiled, a thin, dangerous curve of lips. So let's do what they expect and make them regret it. The rebel ships broke formation, seemingly in panic. Alien captains transmitted arrogant victory calls, believing they had predicted the outcome. Then the trap turned. Hidden fighters poured from repurposed cargo bays, shielded by stealth plating woven from stolen tech. Mines detonated where the cruisers maneuvered, guided by human improvisation. Within minutes, 2 alien carriers tore open in flames. Cheers erupted across the human fleet. The Fractori had underestimated them again. But Illyra didn't celebrate. Her eyes locked on the larger signal still pulsing at the edge of the system. The Overmind ship. The Overmind was no mere commander. It was the architect of the breeding program, the intelligence that had overseen centuries of experiments to break humanity into docility. For Illyra, it wasn't just the enemy. It was the creator that had failed. Set course, she ordered, her voice low. We're ending this tonight. The approach to the Overmind's flagship was chaos incarnate. Alien warships hurled plasma storms, ripping holes through space itself. Human vessels buckled and burned, but for each that fell, another pressed forward. Illyra's people didn't retreat. They couldn't. There was no Earth to return to, no colonies to hide in. Their only future lay in victory or extinction. When her dreadnought punched through the last defense line, the alien mothership filled the viewport like a black sun. It was a monstrous construct, its hull layered with organic plating and metallic veins, pulsing as if alive. Boarding pods ready. Cato reported, sweat streaking his dirt-lined face. Ilara turned to her crew. These weren't soldiers, but they had become more than that. Survivors, fighters, rebels. She looked into their eyes, one by one. They thought they could breed compliance into us, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. But they only bred defiance. Every scar, every loss, every stolen life. It led us here. Tonight we burn the chain at its source. A roar answered her, raw and human. The boarding assault was carnage. Plasma fire lit alien corridors in shades of searing green. The Fractoria defenders fought with mechanical precision, but they were brittle when the unexpected struck. Humans didn't fight by rules. They fought by instinct, by desperation, by fury. Ilara drove them forward. Her hands blistered from the heat of the weapons, her throat raw from shouting commands. They forced their way into the Overmind's chamber. The room was cathedral-like, vast, its walls covered in pulsing organic tissue that glowed with the neural light of the Overmind. A massive form loomed at the center, suspended in a lattice of cables and living tendrils, a grotesque fusion of alien flesh and machine intellect. Its voice came not from a mouth, but from the vibrating air itself, resonating in every skull. You are anomalies, failed constructs. Why resist the order you were born for? Ilara raised her weapon, but her hand shook, not with fear, but with recognition. She felt its pull, the psychic thread it wove into her mind, a voice that whispered in the bones of her bloodline. She had been designed to obey this thing. For a moment, silence clamped her chest like a vice. Then she spat on the floor. Because you can't breathe out freedom. She dropped the rifle, not in surrender. No, she stepped forward barehanded. The others shouted, but she ignored them. Weapons could burn flesh. Only her defiance could kill the idea. She climbed the platform, gripping alien tendrils with blistered hands, and looked into the Overmind's writhing core. Images flooded her brain, generations of humans bent, broken, reshaped. The experiments, the culling, the forced compliance. She saw every ancestor Fractoria had tried to chain, and she carried them with her. You made me, she whispered, pressing her hand against its core. And I'll unmake you. The Overmind struck at her mind, claws of thought raking across her will. But humans had something it didn't understand, something no calculation could predict. Ilara's pain turned into rage, and rage turned into love. Love for her people, for every child stolen, for every comrade lost, for the freedom that was worth every drop of blood. She screamed, and the chamber screamed with her. The core shattered under her touch, not with strength, but with defiance that spread like fire through its neural lattice. Systems collapsed, alien ships faltered outside, and the mothership tore itself apart in a storm of light. Hours later, the survivors drifted in battered ships, watching the alien empire collapse into silence. Without the Overmind, the Fractoria fractured, their fleets dissolving into chaos. Cato leaned against the console, his body broken but his eyes shining. It's done. They can't enslave us anymore. Ilara stood at the viewport, bloodied hands trembling. It's not done, she said softly, but it's begun. Humanity isn't just surviving anymore. We're writing our own story. The others looked to her, and for the first time, they didn't see a weapon the aliens had built. They saw their leader. And in the cold void where the Empire once ruled, the spark of rebellion grew into something greater. Hope.